Welcome to the Moscow Urban Forum, the keynote track. My name is Ksenia Ajube, and I am director of Ajube Scott Whitby Studio. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today. And we are going to welcome a very well-known speaker, Alain Bertaud, who will be speaking about the question, should city managers pick the economic sectors that will succeed in the future? And it's a real honor and a pleasure to have Alain with us today. He is currently Senior Fellow at the Marron Institute of Urban Management at New York University. He teaches urban planning courses, markets design and the city at NYU. And he is the author of a book on urban planning and markets, Order Without Design, How Markets Shape Cities, which is truly fascinating. Alain is an independent consultant and researcher focusing on the interaction between markets, regulations, and transport infrastructure in shaping the spatial form of cities. And his most recent projects address the workings of urban mobility, land development, and housing and infrastructure across the 4 continents, including in Russia, China, and the Americas. Previously, Alain was principal urban planner at the World Bank, and he has been an advisor for governments all over the world. So it's a real honor to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing your critical presentation. Alain, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to participate in this forum. I wish I was there in person. My last visit to Moscow is now 15 years old, so I'm not really up to date. So this subject, in a way, why some cities are particularly successful in some sectors of the economy, and can a city government or a national government make those cities successful? Can they select a sector and say, let us put our resource on that and let us develop this sector? I tell you right away my opinion on that. It's no. The success of a city is made by its the inhabitants of the city themselves. It is their skill and their aggregated skill which creates success and innovation. The government cannot create innovation. The innovation comes from the grassroots, from people who have some skills and get together. So the government can support, of course, and more often, I will say, the government can kill innovative sector. Let us look at. We will look at a little later at a specific example of successful cities which have created a successful sector, and I will also talk about something not to be done, taken from a recent example in New York some years ago with Amazon, and then I will finish by just a few recommendations of what a city can do to stimulate, let's say, innovation, but making sure that I don't think the city should select the sector of innovation. The city should only support whatever innovation is coming from the grassroots. So let us look first at what makes cities excel in specific sectors in general. What cities do in general, and I'm in my job, I'm asked very often to review master plans from all over the world, practically. And in every one of these master plans in the last 30 years, there is a corner of the city which is supposed to become the Silicon Valley of this city. Anywhere, it could be in Latin America, it could be in Asia, it could be in Europe. So what does every city practically wants to have a high-tech sector and think that they can develop it. How do they develop it? Usually what they do, they set apart a neighborhood in a city or extension. They provide infrastructure. They say that usually they will subsidize the developed land for a certain type of industry, for instance, electronic, or it could be something else, and then research, and then they usually also give incentives, tax incentive. For instance, they will say, if a firm come here and meet our criteria of the sector, we will they will not have to pay income tax or property tax for, say, 20 years. Now, what happened in general? So those cities usually are successful in developing this infrastructure, this zone. What happened? Well, something get built, but usually those are warehouses or things like that. People who are creative do not come to a city because there is a discount on land. People who are creative come to a city because there are other people in the city which are already interested and very skilled in the field they are interested in. For instance, if you look at the development recently, which during the COVID, there was the vaccination was based on completely new technology, based on DNA. If you look at what happened, say, in the previous 15 years, where the vaccine were developed, you will see that very skilled people were attracted to only a few cities in the world where they found that there was a laboratory, there was research going on. And so what they were attracted by was not the number of laboratory and certainly not the discount on land or taxes. They were attracted by some professor or some researcher or maybe some firms which were extremely skilled in a very narrow area. So again, on this, really, there is a kind of randomness. What a city can do is only to provide the background, so provide education, and in particular, by the way, one thing which is very important, and I think we will see that in everywhere when you have very very specialized research. Like, for instance, we found that in Singapore or in California or in Texas, those cities have a way of attracting foreigners. They attract people not in their region even, but all over the world. If you look at the innovators, whether they are in Silicon Valley or in other part of the world, in some research center in Europe, in the UK, you will see that those are completely international. They have been able to attract people all over the world. That means too that they can get easily a visa to come here and work there. So this, if you want to really develop, let's say, cities that are innovative, in my opinion, you should not select the area of innovation. You should only provide a very easy, very free movement of people within the city. And of course, it will help enormously if you have excellent universities and possibly research centers, which can do maybe even theoretical research, which are then certainly subsidized by the government. But I think that your goal should be to attract innovative people, not to attract innovative people in one area or another. So let us look now very quickly to in a way, illustrate that by some example. The most obvious one is, of course, Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was developed in a residential area in south of San Francisco. It spanned across about 20 municipalities. And you know that in the United States, the land use and local taxation is entirely done at the local level. The state and certainly the federal government has nothing to do with it. So here we have a group of people who, some of them, of course, coming from the university San Francisco, Stanford and Berkeley, start getting out of university. They had ideas, and they start in a garage to create certain things. And Silicon Valley really came out of that. What is interesting is that next to Stanford was a Xerox laboratory. We're doing research, but a lot of research was done there. Some ideas were developed in this big laboratory, but they were commercialized only when those people left Xerox laboratory and moved into a garage with their friends and started. This is where Hewlett-Packard started. That's the way Apple started. Practically every high-tech firm started not in a special area, but around people who had the same interest. Now, let us look at another example. For instance, New York Broadway theaters. In New York, one of the area, it's an economic area, is Broadway show, music and theater. How did that come about? It didn't come because the government, let's say, or the municipality at certain times say, let us build theater, or let us give a discount to theater builders. It came because there was an enormous influx of immigrants during First World War, after the First World War, between the two wars, and after the Second World War. Those immigrants were coming from all over Europe, from Russia to Germany, Holland, UK, and each of them with tradition in music, very strong tradition in music, coming together in the city of New York as immigrants. They came up with this fantastic innovation of Broadway, which became then a sector of the New York economy, together with finance and other, and high tech too. But say Broadway is a very, very important sector, which was, by the way, dramatically impacted by the COVID. So I could go on like that. On example, for instance, Paris, between 1850 and 1914, practically up to the First World War, was a center of art, and artists, it was a very important, I think, sector of the economy. Again, here, what characterized Paris there at the time was a free movement of people. A lot of people came to Paris, and they came to Paris because there were already a number of artists. Many of those artists were foreigners, they were not necessarily French. The government, at the beginning at least, or most of the time, encouraged the wrong type of art. It's well known. For instance, the Impressionists were always rejected by government institutions, who were patrons of the art, but they were patronizing the wrong art. So you see, again, there's this spontaneous invention which come not from, a decision by the government to consecrate investment in this area, but just by freedom and aggregation of people with skills. So I could go on like that. For instance, I had an example some years ago when I was working in China on a new development in a city which was rather remote in the western part of China, and they had already an industry. They had a large factory making flat screen for computers, and they wanted to develop it further. And they realized that because they were a bit far away, they had a difficulty, recruiting engineers, top engineers and scientists in this area. So instead of, again, saying, well, we are going to give a discount to any factory who will come here, or we are going to give a tax incentive, the mayor of the city went around the area where there were most engineers, like Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen, and he asked them, what will make you come to my city and to work? And they say, we want a good environment without any pollution, because in Shanghai and Beijing we have a lot of pollution, and we want excellent school for our children. We are not going to move to a city with a mediocre school, including, by the way, primary school. We're not talking about university. So the mayor did just that. in a few years, it did just that, and indeed, the city then become a center for innovation in flat screen. So it's a relatively small area of high tech, but for a city of, at the time it was 700,000 people, it was quite a success. So I could go on again with the Hong Kong finance industry. Hong Kong finance industry came about because of the rule of law of Hong Kong and the relative freedom of people, to foreigners, to come and work in Hong Kong. You know, the free movement of people. Then you attract, although Hong Kong at the time was a city-state, so it could attract a lot of foreigners. Singapore did the same thing. You know, Singapore, it's slightly different model, but it is really the skill of the people who are already there who attract more people, and that requires free movement of people across the world, you know, to recruit these. And it doesn't mean that, by the way, in those sectors, only very top, bright people work there. As soon as you have, say, 20 top scientists in one area, say biology, it will, of course, attract a lot of people who are just working in laboratory and doing very routine job, including, by the way, cleaning the laboratory or doing things like that. So, you know, the sector itself is represented by a small group of extremely skilled people who can be recruited worldwide, but the sector itself represents, of course, a much larger number of people. So, so that's where the success story. What not to do? So my example is from New York. Some years ago, Amazon announced that they were going to have a new headquarters somewhere in the United States, but outside from their current headquarters, you know, in the Northwest. And so every city tried to give them a package, you know, of incentives, usually tax, free land, all sorts of things. And as an urban planner, I was very dubious about this. I was pretty sure that Amazon knew exactly in advance where they wanted to move, because again, they wanted to move when there was already a large number of high-tech workers. And that was, you know, there was a choice really of 3 or 4 cities. Eventually, they made a deal with New York and Washington, D.C. I mean, North Virginia, which is basically a suburb of Washington, D.C. And in New York, it badly backfired because the city was giving them, you know, incentive in the form of subsidy in land and taxes. So here we have the richest company, the richest firm in the United States, getting a discount on tax to come to New York. There was then a citizen revolt saying, why don't you fix the subway or the school in New York with this money rather than subsidize the richest firm, you know, the highest capitalized firm in, I guess, in the world. And then it created so much badwill that Amazon then say, okay, we are not going to come to New York. So everybody has lost in that. The New Yorker have lost a very interesting job. And Amazon has lost, although Amazon now is coming back without too much noise and buying some of his building were there. And eventually, they, without saying anything, they will indeed come to New York. But you see here, the mistake was to try to attract innovation through subsidies. You attract innovation through freedom of movement. And if you want to subsidize something, subsidize universities, subsidize schools, so you have a core workforce which is very educated. So this is basically my recommendation. I will maybe summarize then what city can do. First, I think nowadays the environment is very important. Polluted cities have much less chance than non-polluted cities, which is quite a challenge, I think, for large cities, and also depending on the topography, for instance. You know, for instance, a city like Los Angeles is typically more polluted than than San Francisco or New York because of the topography. So but they can still do something about it. I think that schools are extremely important. Not only universities, but even primary schools. People who want to move, the top people who want to move to a city, usually are concerned also about their children. And if they are intellectuals, it's likely that they would like their children to have a good education. So they are not going to move to cities where the schools are mediocre. Then intellectual freedom, obviously. Intellectual freedom, but also be open to foreigners on short visa, on work visa, or things like that. During the 4 Trump years, I think that high-tech in the US suffered enormously because of the difficulties of getting visa. Even among my students at NYU, I had a very bright student who were, normally would have stayed in New York and would have contributed to the high-tech industry in New York, and they were obliged to leave because of the difficulties of getting a visa. Now, making difficulties in giving visa to a student who has completed brilliantly its PhD, and do brilliant research is an absurdity. So, and then land use flexibility. You don't know where those people will establish their research when sometimes they start with small outfit, they cannot spend too much on real estate. So it should be, if there is a lot of flexibility in land use, that means that if you are in high tech, but you tinker only with certain things in a lab, don't put everybody in a big industrial zone. Let them even establish themselves in the back of a garage. And I think that this flexibility will help. Well, this is my talk now. I would be very happy to receive some comments and questions about it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alain. That was wonderful, really fascinating, and very much to my own heart. And I think very relevant for Moscow. I think Moscow has a lot of potential and has a lot going for it that you've mentioned that perhaps it doesn't take full advantage of. And if I may rephrase, I love the fact that you talked about the hacker cities, such as Silicon Valley, the free experimental cities such as Paris in the 19th century, and the freedom of movement in Hong Kong, clean, child-friendly cities. But I guess my favorite example, and for the reason that we already discussed, is New York, because it's an arrival city. And it is just open to the kind of innovation that nobody has ever considered or thought about. And in fact, who are city governments to think that they know what's around the corner? Of course, it's the non-automatable professions, the arts, the scientists, the sciences, the tech, that are going to generate those new innovations in fields we don't even know about yet, in multidisciplinary fields, and to generate those new cultural products like Broadway, which are going to, again, then generate the multi-million dollar industries, whole market sectors. So I think it's a great set of advice for Moscow. And I was wondering, apart from education and this kind of freedom, advice specific to Moscow to create this rich ground for multidisciplinary creativity. What do you think?
Well, you have to be able to attract, again, recruit the top people worldwide. I have no doubt that Russia is well known for its science, and have certainly top scientists. But again, because the field is so narrow, and I think that the openness to foreigners is a stimulant for everybody else, including the locals. in Silicon Valley, about 50% of the CEO of the new startup companies are foreigners. And it's not that because, there is not enough potential CEO in the US, is that those foreigners, because they were transplanted, maybe had more innovative ideas. So I think that in the case of Moscow, the possibility of coming and working there as a foreigner will be a big incentive. And Moscow also offer, I think, I no doubt that the schools are pretty good, but it offers also, I think, a cultural background which is extremely attractive. Well, that will be true of St. Petersburg, of course. Extremely attractive for foreigners, even if their field that has nothing to do with the art. So that's, I think, is.
So an openness to the kind of innovation that migrants can bring, because migrants tend to work harder. They attribute more importance to the education of their children, and they are kind of they work towards social and economic mobility. They really fight very hard for that.
Right, yes.
And so,
but say, yes, last year I was, and just before the COVID, I was invited to give a talk at the university in Moscow, and just to get a visa for this, 3 days. I think I was going to say 3 or 4 days. It was a lot of work. It was very, very difficult, and that's really discouraged. Movement of people and innovation. So I don't want to, your government may have a reason for being, very, let's say, a little difficult on visa. The United States, by the way, is not free of that either. But I think that this is an area that has to be considered. Again, if you want this innovation coming worldwide.
Yeah, and I think that's very important because diversity supports resilience.
Right.
And at the end of this pandemic shows that we need more resilient cities and more resilient built environments, more resilient economies. And I think every government, of course, has its alliances, and those alliances may change, but also Russia is very multicultural in its own right. So I think there's great potential, and there's great cultural richness which can be taken advantage of.
Yes, that's indeniably, yes.
Fantastic. Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you about these very relevant themes, and we look forward to welcoming you in Moscow in person next time, we hope. And
I hope so too.
Discussing some of these themes further and in more practical terms.
Certainly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alain. It's been an honor to have you, and thank you very much all for watching. We'll see you at the next session. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.